Welcome to the Heartache Connoisseur podcast. My friends Kate and Ian are here today. Kate Bell, Ian Kearns.
Yes.
I know
Kearns, yes.
Is that your last name?
That's my last name, yeah.
These are therapists, both of them. And I, too, work in the mental health industry. And we've assembled here today to talk about relationships, but just sort of a unique part of that, the aspect of the termination of relationships and the breakup and that whole cycle. Because there's a lot of commonalities amongst people in terms of the ending of a relationship and the traumatic nature of that thing and the recovery from that. A lot of the patterns that people get into, the traps they fall into, the back and forth, the ways that we just punish each other, maybe when we know it's done and we just keep beating this dead horse. There's a lot of things we do wrong. And we want to try and help folks understand themselves and what they're doing maybe a little bit and why they're doing it. And there's no getting around the pain of it. And we want to address that too and hopefully help people feel less alone in that and provide some hope too, that it could be going somewhere better for them in the future. And then how to assimilate all that has happened into a story that's helpful and makes sense for them moving forward. So, Ian, I'll start with you. You know, let's just each tell just a little bit of our own breakup history and why. I mean, we have degrees in counseling and such, but why the hell else are we qualified to talk about this? I mean, have you ever been heartbroken, Ian?
Yes. I'm on my second marriage, which is I tell people I can counsel them on marriage counseling because I've done it twice, which makes me an expert. My first marriage was 10 years and it ended very abruptly. Walked in the door, first wife was crying, holding a Bible, and told me she'd had an affair with a friend of ours. And it was pretty devastating, if I'm being honest. This was a guy who I'd fixed his car and assembled, and the affair had gone on for a long time. And
what did he do for a living?
He was an ethics professor.
See, that's just too juicy of a detail to leave out.
He was, in fact, my ethics professor. I took his class, and he gave me a B. Right, you know what I'm going to say next.
Then he twisted the knife.
Right.
Then he gave your wife an F.
He was giving her the D, and he gave me a B.
Okay, well.
He stepped on my joke.
It's funny. See, and that's the thing, too, right? Looking back on it, it was devastating and super painful. But now you found some levity in it.
Yes. And that I try to convey that, to clients when I'm talking to them. And I'll say at the time it feels like your world is over, like you can't go on. And when you talk to people rationally, most people, by the time they've had a breakup, have experienced some degree of loss. And they understand that, like watching a glass of water evaporate, you don't see it go day by day, but eventually that glass is empty and there's just a white crust on the inside of the glass if you live in Iowa City. So,
yeah, we have a lot of minerals around here.
Yes.
A lot of minerals.
The minerals of heartbreak is what we're talking about today.
So you've had a divorce, check. How about you, Kate?
So I'm 30 and unmarried, so that should tell you everything you need to know. I was in a relationship with a guy for 4 years, thought it was going somewhere, come home one day, just over, not really for any reason. Kind of like Ian said, you think your whole world's over until you find out that, he's dating all of your coworkers. So water cooler was a little awkward for those first 5 months, but
4 years is a long time, and I think sometimes we have this distinction in our mind that it was just a boyfriend. It's not the same as a husband or a wife, but 4 years is a hell of a long time. A lot of marriages don't last that long.
That's exactly what I tell clients. Where really marriage is just a piece of paper. You when you actually get married, you're still the same person that you were in the morning. Right? It's a commitment to the other person, but really you don't have to have the piece of paper to still be committed to somebody in that same way.
It's true. There's some truth to that. However, I might add that anything you can do psychologically and spiritually to get people to commit to the notion of never leaving is really helpful when it comes time to solving problems. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, if you got one foot out the door, or it's easy, or you're not fully committed, then I think it's hard for me to work with couples sometimes that are really unsure of whether or not they even want to be in the relationship when it comes to actually getting down to the nuts and bolts of solving some of their communication and difficulties and such, because that's not the question at hand. The question is whether or not you want to work through your commitment issues right now,
Right. It does, I think, need to be said that sometimes a brief relationship can intensify a sense of loss. And I say that because if you've been married for 15 years and, you're sick of the other person's smell of their farts or whatever it is, you're the magic of that is largely gone, and you're in a committed relationship. But there's not a lot of fun. There's not a lot of, you look forward to seeing the person because you come to take them for granted. If you're in the first couple of years or months of a relationship and it ends suddenly, you're still getting a huge dopamine fix from that person. It's all positive reinforcement at that point. There's no difficulty. And that actually, we can dismiss it and we can say, oh, well, you're only dating them, or you guys were just, doing it for a couple months. Neurologically, though, I think that's hard. That can be hard to let go of because you've got somebody who is just making you feel good all the time, and then boom.
Yeah, that's the novelty piece. Yeah. And I've noticed too that for folks, there's when a relationship moves out of that stage, sometimes you have to mourn the loss of that stage.
Yeah.
You have to get used to the idea that may never come back quite that way again.
And I'll work with clients who've been married for 10 years and they don't they'll say, well, it was easy at first. And that's, you've heard that before too, I'm sure, Kate. And it always is. Of course it is. You don't have kids, you don't have, these jobs that tend to intensify as you get older, and you can spend all kinds of time with each other. I remember Rachel's and my first time we ever hung out for the day. Rachel's my current wife. I called into my job because I had kind of a goof-off job, and we went to the beach. I couldn't do that now, and that's a different thing. And we wouldn't go to the beach because we've got 3 kids. And if we took a day off, we'd clean the house and do grown-up parent stuff.
Does everybody have the snacks that we need? Or is the iPads and the coloring? But yeah,
there's going to be sand on everything for years.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and, what do you think, Kate? You weren't married, but I understand for you it was volatile. What was the emotional experience like for you?
It was horrible. I just think back to those first couple of days after the breakup, and you felt like your world was over, and you wake up and you're living in your mom's house again, and it feels rock bottom, and you keep questioning everything that you did, and you're like, gosh, what could I have done differently to get a different outcome? And I think that's the mistake a lot of people make is,
that they should have been able to see this coming and fix it ahead of time, or, I call it a case of the coulda, woulda, shoulda, but if onlys.
Exactly. And so I did a lot of just beating myself up for those, first couple days, and then it kind of stayed that way for a long time. And then you start desperately looking for anything that's going to make it better.
I was married young. Met my first wife, bless her heart, at age 18 when I was still in college, and married when we were in our early 20s, and we're married nearly 20 years. And the breakup doesn't even begin to describe what that process was like. That was, not only was it the loss of the nuclear family and all that represented, and a person that I'd been with for years. And although there were many moments where we didn't like each other very much, but it was still, I was so deeply connected to them. And people think, well, maybe I'll get divorced and I'll feel so free. Well, yeah, but there will come a day where you have to take a look at what you've lost and feel that and allow that to be. But it was just it altered my worldview. That's how powerful it was. It forced me, it brought me to my knees in such a way that I really had to analyze all of my beliefs about myself and the world around me, and my faith and my work and my role as a parent, and all of it was called into question in such a way. But it needed to be. That's the thing, and because of some mistaken understandings in those arenas, that's part of what led to to the demise of the marriage. And so to be in a successful relationship would have taken both of us retooling many of those areas together as a team. And it's hard when both partners don't want to do that. What do you do? I mean, when you're in a relationship and both people are not on the same page with respect to the fixes that need to be employed, that's a really tough spot that a lot of people find themselves in.
And you touched on something, Marty, like the whole idea of just being shaken to your core, because I think whether it's a marriage relationship or just a dating relationship, you invest so much of who you are in the context of who you are within that relationship, what your world looks like with this person. So not only are you no longer that person's girlfriend, you're not friends with their friends anymore. You're not a part of their family anymore. So it's
the loss extends over multiple layers.
Absolutely. And it's also not just that, but the internal loss of who you connected yourself to be. Mm-hmm. So you're having to let go of that idea of who you were, where your life was going, and completely have to start over. So even sitting with yourself, sitting with your thoughts, everything feels like this new normal.
Mm-hmm. Right. And what we're talking about is, I think that virtually everyone does this. It's a process of what we refer to as enmeshment, where you become so intertwined with someone and your boundaries blur. And to peel that apart it's sort of like peeling apart two pieces of cardboard that have been glued together. I mean, you may end up with two pieces, but now it's shredded, and there's some of them on me and some of me on them, and it's rough around the edges now, and there's no going back ever. You're changed
as a person, the core of who you are.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I work with people on immediately, is staying in their circle of control and differentiating. And that means to know where you end and the other person begins. And a lot of times when you're in a marriage, you get so enmeshed, as you said, with the other person, that you find yourself feeling like they're an extension of you, and you want to control their behavior and what they do. And that's something you have to parse out in the opening stages of couples therapy, is to say, well, what can you control in this situation? And a lot of times, couples therapy starts with just one person coming in because the spouse refuses to come in or won't come in or thinks they're going to get ganged up on. A lot of times they've had a bad experience in couples therapy, or they've heard about it. So, you work with the one person and say, well, what can you control? And once you get somebody into their circle of control, it's easier for them to understand what they can do and what they can't. Does that make sense?
Sure, yeah. You hit on something that I think is a really fundamental point for folks to understand about the way we treat each other. Our minds are like mental maps. We have representations of the world around us within us. When I see you and look at you and talk to you, you're sound waves and you're light, and it's all perceived by my senses and translated into a symbol of you inside of me. And that symbol can shift over time. Like right now, I'm seeing you as my colleague and my friend and my podcast partners right now, and there's an element of respect, and we're operating in that space. That's our role. But in relationships, oftentimes it's at the beginning, it's lover, and it's exciting, and it's soulmate, and it's all of these huge positive words. And then gradually those ideas shift and change, and this person is no longer that to you. And I would say, well, first of all, that's okay. But second of all, you can fall into some traps. And one of the things you mentioned is that we try to control each other. I no longer see you as a person. Now I see you as a drill. And when I want a hole, damn it, I want to be able to pick up that drill. And I don't want that drill to argue with me. And I want that drill to put a hole in the wall right where I want it. And if it doesn't, it's no damn good to me. And that's how we begin to see each other in long-term relationships often, where we lose perspective on the other's personhood, and we just attempt to control them all the time.
Well, I think, and I explain it to clients a lot with a mental emoji, which is, I think, what you were saying. It's a more of a pathetic attempt on my part to be cool and hip. But it's this idea that, right, a swing and a miss. Mm-hmm. But when and it depends hour to hour, year to year. Sometimes when I think about my wife, if we've had an unpleasant interaction, my mental emoji is like a scowly face. Mm-hmm. It's the red angry face, and sometimes it's the really happy face, and and that's one of the things that we do after a breakup is we idealize and we only use the mental emojis that suit where our brain wants to take us, which is usually I've suffered this terrible loss and this person was everything to me. They were only happy things. And you forget about the unpleasant mental emojis that you have for that person when you're grieving and beating yourself up.
Right, and we think of, and we'll go to just a sec, Kate, but we think of nostalgia and memories of the past as a really good thing, but they can get us into trouble if they become imbalanced. Mm-hmm. Isn't that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Sort of, yeah.
It's interesting, too, what you'd said about I just read an article, and you may have read it, about the monkeys when they use a tool. Their brain, after a while, that tool begins to be an extension of their arm. They actually map out in their brain an area of the brain for that tool, which is why, I don't know if you've ever had a favorite tool. You'd think, well, a hammer is just a hammer. But if you've got a hammer and you're used to it and the heft and whatever, and that's the one you use when you're working on something, that's because your brain has assimilated that. It's become part of your body to your brain.
For me, it's my pen and my clipboard. If I pick up the wrong kind of pen, I can't even, I don't know you. I'm not writing with you.
Right, and it's unpleasant almost.
Yeah, no, you're right. That's a good point.
What were you going to say, Kate?
No, all I was going to say is talking about that element of control. If people were being really honest with themselves, it's those days and weeks following a breakup. Part of the hardest part is that you can't control what that person's going to do anymore. You have those nights that you're laying awake and you're thinking about where they're at, who they're talking to, what they're not doing, what they are doing. And part of the really hard part about a breakup is giving up that element of control.
Why don't we just stop worrying about that?
Because your brain has mapped out that person as part of you. And so you can't stop worrying about it. It's that person has changed the structure and function of your brain so fundamentally that you can't shut it down. Those neurons are going to fire no matter what you do, and you're going to wonder what they're doing. Because the other night, because I of course was not paying attention to what my wife had told me when she was coming home, and I knew she was coming home. Well, I didn't know. I should have known she was coming home at a certain time. She was home rather late from one of her things, and not knowing where she was and just the temporary absence of that person freaked me out to the point where I was genuinely distressed. I'm laying there, I couldn't sleep. I woke up, walking around. I'm texting her. I'm freaking out. And she was in a meeting that ran really late. That's like a temporary short version of what happens when somebody just exits your life and you have an expectation. You're going to feel it. You're going to feel it on a very fundamental level in your brain that they're not there anymore, and you want to regain that control. If that makes sense.
You're right. I think that's well said. What do you think these relationships do for us? Why do we cling to them so tightly, even when we know, if we could move into the realm of talking about toxic relationships or breakups, why do we stay in there and go through that process, knowing full well and listening to other people tell us, and our doctors and our counselors, that you need to break contact, you need to stop this, you need to block, you need some space, but we don't listen to that. Why don't we listen?
I think a lot of it is we want to prove to ourselves that we can make it work, that we're that person that can make this different, that we can make that person happy, that we can, even in the face of what everybody's saying, that we're going to defy the odds, right? And it does something, I mean, at least in my opinion, it's something about ego, maybe self-identity, trying to say, no, I can make this work. I'm different than everyone else.
I'm different, yeah. I should be able to fix this.
Yeah, and I think there's a certain level, too, when you have these toxic patterns, it's almost like you become addicted to the pattern. Right? You mentally get almost a reward from, we fought really, really badly. It was a horrible day or two. But when we fix that, when we solve it, I get that immediate reward of, well, see, we're okay.
Yeah. Let's run this thought experiment. We've touched on this, and I know in our private conversations, but the idea of using an addiction model to understand toxic breakups and toxic relationships. And we can contrast that later with healthy separation and healthy relationships, and talk about the difference between addictive patterns versus healthy, more well-adjusted patterns. But when we think about a drug, well, what makes a drug addictive? It's when we spend large amounts of time, money, and resources trying to get it. we begin to believe we need it. If we don't have it, things happen to us that we find unpleasant. We experience withdrawal. We begin to be forced to deal with things within us that drug was blotting out for us. And there's cravings, and you need it. You got to have it, and that's not unlike what, especially people today, the younger people that I work with. That's what it's like for them in these relationships when they end. What do you think?
I think you touched on the what are the 3 C's of addiction, right? Craving, consequences, and control. And you, as you said, you crave people. You think about them. You're preoccupied with them. There are terrible consequences in some cases for talking to them or interacting with them. Mostly just intrapersonally, how you feel after you've done that. Oh, I let myself down. I went back. I allowed him or her to do this to me again. And you lose control sometimes.
It's not unlike an alcoholic who's like, damn it, I relapsed last night, or I blew
yeah,
it.
Exactly. Yeah, and then you
Shame.
control. Yeah, some people make you lose control. You can go a little crazy. That's where stalking comes from, and that's that you lose control of your wants overwhelm your lizard brain need for that person overwhelms your prefrontal cortex ability to say, you know what, every time I talk to this person, they poop in my tacos. It's not a good thing, but you do it anyway.
I think there's like a sadistic element to it too, because once you break up with somebody, you have that craving to see what they're doing, to check up on them, to look on their Facebook page. You want to see what they're doing, but it's going to hurt. So we do this repetitive cycle where we keep looking at their page, we see what they're doing, it hurts. It sends us into a tailspin for the next hour or two. We have to call our friends, we have to look to our family, calm us down, and then we repeat the behavior in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm. It's almost comical. I mean, I did it. We all did it. I've done it. There's this moment though that I remember experiencing in some past breakups where I just finally had to say no. The old Nancy Reagan, just say no, and no more contact. This was our last goodbye right here. It was an extremely unsatisfying, who knows, maybe we've phone call or text or something. This was it, or this was somebody else's fishing for my attention, but I'm not going to reply. That's a moment that you got to have, I think, where you're done, and you got to be done. You got to commit to it like you would sobriety.
I agree almost entirely. I know I can say from personal experience. I had a relationship once with someone, and we were great friends. And it was I don't know if you've ever had one of these where you're like, well, we're friends and we hang out all the time, so we might as well, we'll kill 2 birds with one. Not the best basis on which to build a relationship. And so there was a romantic relationship there that was based almost entirely on friendship and personal rather than romantic attraction. And when we broke up, it was tough, because we realized that we may have blown our friendship by crossing a boundary that we shouldn't have. And so what we came up with was, look, we can't do this right now. Like, we can't. It's too blurry. It's too messy. So we have to not talk to each other for, and we said, let's try 8 weeks and see if we feel better. And that did work for us. And we're to this day, we're pretty good friends. But we had to have no contact for about 8 weeks and then get back in touch and hang out. And from personal experience, I think it can work. However, you have to give yourself a time and not violate that time, in my experience, so that your brain can sort of reintegrate that person in a new way. You can let go of some of the old.
Yeah. Separation is highly underrated, is one of my opinions. I always say that to people. Well, have you really seriously considered taking some time apart? And that's a really scary step. I think that's a major loss of control when you say live in a separate location, if you were living together or something like that. But at some point, you got to do something to change the patterns. And we've talked about relationships as acting like addictions. Well, what's the opposite of that? I mean, on one hand we have cocaine, on the other hand we have broccoli. Broccoli's good for us. It cures cancer, as George Carlin said, But we don't go after broccoli. We don't want to, at least early in life. And this is the old, why do women keep choosing the bad boy, and why do guys keep going after the tart, I guess you'd say, for lack of a better term. All women are lovely creatures, and I mean no disrespect, but what's the word there? What's the opposite of douchebag?
The bad girl.
The bad girl. Okay, fine. All right, bad girl. What is it? Why do we do that?
I think, again, it comes back to that whole intensity, because it's like, if you have a healthy relationship, you're not screaming at each other right before you go to a party, right? You're not trying to make your boyfriend or girlfriend jealous by flirting with the person across the room and still going home with that person. I mean, you're not playing those games. So I think when we've had a taste of like the spike of, okay, we're going to fight, it's going to be super intense, but we'll make up and it'll be good. It's those highs and lows where if you're in a healthy relationship, it's just always pretty steady, right?
That's true. I mean, and it gets back to what you were saying about the brain chemistry piece, is that those are spikes. Those are highs in a way. Even though we might say, well, I'm angry or I'm filled with rage, there's something about that is actually covertly satisfying to us, isn't there?
Right. And I think what if, in layman's terms, we mistake that for passion.
Mm-hmm.
And we equate passion, everybody tells us you have to have this passion in a relationship, but I think there's different types of passion, but we equate it with a really unhealthy pattern of, we're going to fight, make up.
Well, and there's that idea, too, that below the neck, it's all, arousal's all kind of the same. That's why they show in horror movies, there's always, usually a topless woman in the first 5 minutes. That increases
Right.
your heart rate.
Yeah.
And what was it? I think it was Stanford, the bridge experiment, where the people would walk across the rickety bridge. And on windy days, they'd encounter a person in the middle of the bridge. And at the end, they would, the researcher would ask the person how attractive the person in the middle of the bridge was. And on windy days, the person was rated as being much more attractive. It's funny in the study, too, because they say a rather average-looking person, which
Well, I think it comes back to the idea that you could lose it at any time. Because something that's readily available to us, we tend to value those things less. So if this person is always on the brink of leaving, we tend to value that more.
Yeah,
So
scarcity principle just makes it much more pursuable.
What do you think the underlying evolutionary? I mean, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. We've been at this for millions of years. It's survived. This pattern has survived in the human genome and in society. Why? It's serving some kind of a purpose. I mean, it's sort of like the intensity leads to mating, and it propagates the species, and it's this. The alpha male douchebag, he's got the traits that women are programmed to want, which is somebody that looks like they would be desirable to other members of the female species. Therefore, they tend to have bigger muscles and faster cars and more flashy jobs and everything. And for men, tend to be, their underlying psychology draws them to women who look very reproductively sound, with that waist to hip ratio and the breasts and all that, and that's when people accentuate those features and they go to the gym all the time and they wear the push-ups and then they put on the smelly stuff and the makeup and they get in the same dance club. Boom! I mean, that's all the ingredients you need right there for making babies, as far as I can tell.
Well, I think it's interesting. I love those Discovery shows about cavemen. I like it when they have like the CGI or the people in makeup and they've got the fake body hair and they crawl around, and I don't know. I think it's the best thing ever. But I watch a lot of them, and in thinking about it, I've thought, and they've said it on a lot of these shows and a lot of the writing. Humans are pretty. I mean, we're pretty unique in that we're kind of monogamous. And when I say kind of, I mean kind of. And a lot of things have influenced that, like the fact that our lifespans are obscenely long now. So monogamous 2,000 years ago is a different thing than monogamy in 2017, because 2,000 years ago, if you were my age, you'd be considered probably really old. Mm-hmm. I mean, you are now to some extent. But there are a lot of things with attachment and with co-parenting. Humans have to spend 18 years or so getting a human baby ready to go out into the world. And so having a strong attachment, a strong bond to your partner is evolutionarily advantageous, because if you don't, you're going to have a single parent situation, which thousands of years ago was probably not as good, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot more than just the mating.
But that drive inside doesn't necessarily, it doesn't want stable, khaki pants and white shirt, rolled up sleeves, and it doesn't want that. It wants something else. For most people, many people, the folks that I see, I mean, there are exceptions, of course, and as you age, typically, I think people do tend to choose partners that are much more suited to their actual compatibilities, as opposed to just what gives them a charge. And you mentioned the animal brain earlier, and just a quick and dirty way to think about it might be that in our youth, we're driven heavily, throughout the lifespan, but especially in our youth, before we've learned what we need to know to find peace and contentment in life, we're driven heavily by this animal brain, and we ignore the cortex, which is laid over the top of this thing. And as we age, we begin to become ever more in tune with what it is that makes us human, as opposed to, let's say, an animal, in my opinion, where we get to choose then against our animal instincts and choose what it means to be a higher level of species with our cortex. We have all the animal drives, but we're self-aware, cognizant, sentient beings capable of great atrocities and great acts of love, and we have to deal with that and figure out who we are, and then use all that information to choose a mate that's not going to make our life suck, basically. Thanks for listening to the Heartache Connoisseur podcast. Please look us up on social media or on our website, theheartacheconnoisseur.com, and come back again for part 2 and then for part 3 with more Ian and Kate on relationships. Thanks.